Hi everyone. In my email this week, I mentioned that for the reasons stated, I'm traveling through Eastern Cape on Monday and only back effectively on Thursday morning. We can't have the webinar, and I mentioned that I will do a video recording and incorporate that in a voice thread for you to be able to comment or ask questions, and I will have a look at that and give you feedback. So the voice thread would be about assessment 3. Only this morning I realized that I've actually already done a voice thread a few weeks ago to prepare you already for assessment 3, which this is the SACAP page for our module, and it will look a little bit different to yours because I've got your educator version here. But when you look in your page for this module, under the assessment tab here to the left here, there are various elements here, and then the information that I'm talking about, the voice thread, is in here. So firstly, assessment 3 is where you will upload. I've got an assessment 3 answer template that I would please ask you to use. That is APA formatted, and it gives you all the headings, which I suggest you keep those headings, but I mean, if you want to change the wording, it's also okay, but I would suggest some structure like that. And then here's the voice thread assessment 3 briefing, in which I cover, I believe, the assessment in relative detail. So I'm not going to really redo it. I'm just sending you this as perhaps a few more points to make around that. So work through that voice thread. And in that voice thread, please make comments and ask questions, which as I said, I will come back to you on. And then what I just want to emphasize from what is in that voice thread is that the module outline shows you links or gives you links to the various SAPI documents that you will use for example, the last question in assessment 3. So what I've done is I've already downloaded that for you because the module outline, the links are outdated. I think most of them refer to 2020, and SAPI's 2021 information is already available. So I want you to please use these documents over here. So I've given you the PDFs of the various documents there, and then just below that, for each of those PDFs, I've also given you the link to the online versions of those reports, which some students may wish to actually just browse through the various pages in an online fashion. Some may want to use the PDF, but it's there for you. Don't use the links in the module outline. And also, I don't think I made the point too explicit in the previous video. There's a lot of information here to read, the SAPI, the various codes, the various documents. And then there also, the King report and the textbook. So I would probably, the textbook was reading, so you need to read that chapter and know the chapter, or have read the chapter. The King 4 report, you could have worked through that as well. And then familiarize yourself with those pages that were prescribed. Again, the idea is not for you to memorize or to actually have done word for word reading, but you need to know what the report looks like, what it presents you. And then to come back to the SAPI reports, again, there's no expectation that you would have read these things word for word, because there's really a lot of information on here. You need to use an intelligent approach to these various reports. Your departure point will be the questions that are in the assessment in the module outline, and let that guide you in your a review of the various material that SAPI has, the annual reports and so on, and then of course the code of ethics. So I'm just making that point that we don't expect you to we're not examining your knowledge of all the detail in these reports. You will have to use that just to illustrate the case study. It's an actual company, as you probably, this is an actual company. And you must use your judgment and use an intelligent assessment and approach to answering those questions as carefully as possible, given the word count limit as well. So the other point I want to make is for the case studies. There is that wannabe company case study in one of the questions about the HR information and so on. When you do the case studies, for example, that one, you will write around the scenario of the case study. We don't want you to theorize. It's an actual case study that we want you to be pragmatic about what you will actually do in those circumstances, and what you will, like for example, a wannabe case study is, how will you interpret their numbers? We don't need definitions and all sorts of things like that, okay? So work with the particular case study context given to you. The same holds true for the project management case study with the risks and the specific project that your HR executive wants you to take project management responsibility for. You may want to briefly refer to some concepts in terms of, let's say, kind of a definition way or something, but the focus should primarily be on applying your understanding of the various elements that was part of pre-reading, and speak specifically to that case study, the HR project case study. So we don't want to, when you do the risk, discussing the risk, to just discuss, let's say, the risk of budget, not enough budget, or whatever the risk is, and talk about it in like abstract theoretical way about what that might mean. You need to link it back to the specific case study context that we've given you. And it goes without saying in SAPI the same thing. You may want to briefly talk about those various issues that we raised, corporate governance and corporate social responsibility and so on. But the idea there, what I'll be looking for, is that you can explain the various issues relating to the various questions in a way that I actually can see you understand, and therefore you're able to communicate in your assessment 85 or 90% of it, the actual SAPI situation and how it's applied within SAPI, and in one particular question how effective it would be within SAPI given the various documents that you have. For example, there's one question around how effective do you think the SAPI code of ethics will be in practice, or words to that effect. And when you look at that SAPI code of ethics, simply just reading through that will give you an idea, and many of you are in a work situation and can associate with a code of ethics, and what would make that effective, and how does that shine through in the SAPI reports. So you make an assessment of that. One element, for example, and I think I recall this, I might be mistaken, but I think it's in the SAPI code of ethics, where I thought they're quite effective in stating the issue, and then they give some examples of that for staff that will be real life things that they can relate to, which makes the particular ethics issue very clear, and what bad behavior would be and what response might be. So that probably leads to more effectiveness. So that's one assessment perhaps you can make, and then you could also make other assessments like that. So let me just see if there's anything else regarding the assessment 3. Let me just briefly go to have I got the module outline here? Yeah. So so assessment 3, I'm not going to go through this in depth, but you read through this, and before I forget, I've seen this throughout the years, and I think the first assessment was quite similar, is that when the questions, the kind of call it more theoretical questions, like for example, describe the concept of HR architecture, define an HRIS, those two questions, let's say, students are always tempted to go to websites and then try and talk to these questions around the websites. You know, your first port of call must be your textbook. So the kind of questions and answer sort of situation around this module, and also the business management fundamentals 1 module, is that we specifically ask you to convey your understanding of the prescribed material that relates to certain context. You know, by all means bring in some other stuff, but do use your textbook as kind of the base resource. You know, some answers in some questions in assessment 1 and through the years in this one, people bring in all sorts of obscure websites that explain the type of issue in a completely different way, which doesn't really relate to the true meaning, for example, of HR architecture. So please do use your textbook. I understand that in some modules, you know, you may have a lot of reading and articles and so on, and you would be asked to do an essay that speaks to a 1 or 2 liner scenario. Then you know you've got quite creative license to illustrate your understanding of theories and philosophies and so on. This module is slightly different. It is actually, I think, quite practical, and so therefore do stay within the textbook, which are, I think, relatively practically orientated, and by all means bring in something else, but don't just do some obscure website, because often those websites which students are very fond of including are not really kind of reliable in terms of the various concepts that we're trying to convey. So that's really the case for all. Like the case study here, the number C, it is less so. Here you will have a case study to work with where, you know, you probably won't have like a lot of opportunity to use all sorts of references, which I also don't expect. And then it's a simple case study, and you will interpret the numbers, and then you will provide I think 2 parts. You will interrogate and explain the numbers, the measurements, and then in the second part you write about 5 HRM related initiatives that can support the achievement of this. Where you won't really, I think, benefit from trying to find that in a well, do your search and see what initiatives might be, but you would base this specifically on this case study, and you've got a poetic license to really you know, be quite creative around the various projects. Again, I don't expect you to have pages and pages of references. If there's a need to for one of the initiatives, you can refer to where maybe that would have been used in the past, or where some credible source have noted that. I'm not sure how much of that you'll get in the textbook. So you've got some license more here than in those question-answer type questions. But still, your textbook would be a foundation. Project management, the same thing, you know, brevis and verbose, quite explicit. And you know, for example, this deconstruction of work is a specific issue that's described in a textbook, and I'm referring you specifically to the textbook. And in the past, I've had students that have gone to some obscure website and tried to kind of make do an explanation, make an explanation of what is this deconstruction of work, and then kind of losing the plot a little bit. So yeah, define project management. In the voice thread, I mentioned the Project Management Institute that you can perhaps go and see if you can find their definition, but the textbook, I think, has a definition there. What aspects the business project manager, the project manager need to have control over. That's specifically noted in a textbook, which we expected you to have read, and then you will explain those issues here, or similar issues, to explain your understanding of that. Project constraints is a familiar concept, and it's set out in a textbook and also in a material in various sessions that are on the MySACAP, and I've given you, all of this is somewhere in those PowerPoint slides and so on, and then also in a textbook. Also here, very specific in a textbook around examples around the different values held as important by different stakeholders. So although we expect you to be perhaps closely aligned to the textbook, we do understand that there are different opinions and so on, but we're trying to impart the basics around business management fundamentals too, and by staying within that broad framework of the prescribed material, with perhaps some portion relating to outside sources, credible sources, we understand that when you move forward after business management fundamental 2, you're sitting in a business situation one day that you will of course use other resources, but we're trying to impart a basic level of competence around the particular topics, and our pre-reading speaks to that. Okay, and then the B of the case study, again I'm emphasizing you need to speak to the case study. So review the list of reasons why project failed, and then choose the top 6 reasons that you believe are the high-risk items for your project. So based on this case study, okay, this year, within that context, what are your 6 risks? Okay, and then you have the freedom to make assumptions where necessary and explain these in your answers. So be specific about the context. Okay, and then we are referring to that chapter in the textbook. Okay, and then the SAP, I've spoken about that. Also, everything will be related to this practical situation of an actual company, in evaluating this company and making assertions around what you can find as evidence in those various reports. Okay, and yeah, so okay, so I think that's enough. If you have any questions around assessment 3, you would have done them hopefully in a voice thread comments as well. You can also send me emails so that we can be as effective as possible to deal with some of your questions, or with your questions rather. Okay.